there and welcome to Capital View. On this episode, joining me is Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, economist, philosopher, eminent citizen of India. Professor Sen, thanks so much for joining me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
It's lovely to talk to you.
We live in interesting times.
We do, yeah.
Just 9 months ago, that big mandate for Narendra Modi, and in Delhi, this massive mandate for the Aam Aadmi Party and Arvind Kejriwal. What explains, do you think, this massive mandate for the Aam Aadmi Party and Kejriwal?
Well, I think partly it expresses a kind of disappointment with the Modi government. I think, of course, the way the scenario is being made up is all fault of Kiran Bedi, and clearly she wasn't in some ways an inspiring figure. She didn't have very much time either to do that. On the other hand, to say that it's got nothing to do with Modi, I think is a mistake, because, I was one of the first to point out that even though I disagreed with Modi, I admired the fact that he generated some kind of sense of hope. I think the previous government had been so ineffective in many ways that people found it difficult to believe that things can be done. And this can-do approach, which almost is shared with Obama's promise in the first election, when he became president, did play a part. But by the time I think the Delhi election came, it was clear that a lot of the can-do was in fact not happening. And they are can-do but not done, or not begun to be done either. So I think there was that, and I have great, as a proud Indian citizen, I do think that we do care about such issues as tolerance and religious freedom. And, while this was going on, there were some churches being vandalized, and there have been things elsewhere. Garbhapsi is not a good way of, effectively inducing people to move from one religion to another. I think the Indian population was responding to it. The important thing to recognize is that the Juggiwalas in Delhi will always remain in support of Kejriwal anyway. What happened is New Delhi, Old Delhi, the Civil Lines, South Delhi moved to Kejriwal. This is a kind of rather reflective public. You come from that, I take it.
Yes.
And I think to them, the fact that secularism is in danger was a factor of some importance.
Do you see this as a kind of emergence of a left-of-center politics again, because a rise of a pro-poor, left-of-center kind of a politics? If Modi represents the kind of right-wing politics, and does Kejriwal represent the left-wing in a sense?
I think we have to distinguish between different elements in that, because rhetorically, Indian political parties are all very pro-poor, have always been. It's a question of what they're doing on the ground. I think the perception that Kejriwal do understand the difficulty of those who are excluded socially from the privileges that the middle classes and the upper classes get. I think that understanding has become bigger. Now, I wouldn't say it's a left-wing thing. That requires a kind of philosophy and understanding of the left-wing tradition. We are living at a time when the left parties have in doldrums. I think partly because of the fact that I think many of the leading issues were unaddressed, and they went on to peripheral issues, and all the time battling against American imperialism, which is not the great threat that from which India is really suffering.
On the subsidies question, I know we've spoken about this before, and you've always said it's a real middle-class hypocrisy, because we live surrounded by subsidized electricity and subsidized facilities, but we really get upset when the poor are getting subsidies. But on this issue of free water and free electricity, or subsidized water and subsidized electricity that he's promising, do you think this is sort of the politics of subsidy is misguided, or is it needed?
I think the politics of subsidy is basically misguided in general. But then within the structure, you have to say, who are the people who are benefiting? One of the things that I've been complaining about, that the subsidies that go, have gone standardly to the relatively rich, which is fertilizer, electricity for, big establishment, diesel, cooking gas. they have tended to be relatively wealthier compared with the poor in India. I think the difference in the Delhi context is this. First of all, you're dealing with a place where most people have some kind of electric connection, and to the extent they don't, Kejriwal is promising that he will arrange that. Water is a very basic necessity. It's not that the rich that benefit from it. There is not the same thing as subsidy for fertilizers or diesel and so on. I have to say, to give credit to the Modi government, I think under Jaitley, they have tried to move away from some of these subsidies, and I think rightly. But I think Kejriwal is making use of the fact that subsidies still attract people, especially if it could be directed towards the poor.
I just want to bring you back to what you were saying about the mandate for Kejriwal and the disappointment factor perhaps in the Modi government. How would you assess these 9 months of Modi? Do you think that there's good and there's bad? Do you think he's brought a certain dynamism to the Prime Minister's office that perhaps Manmohan had failed to do?
He did, and there was when I was doing the Express Adda, I did mention a statement which almost crowded everything else that I said, which said that Modi had brought in a certain kind of hope, which is true. I think in some way a lot of Congress supporters were getting hopeless, a lot of left supporters, traditional supporters were getting hopeless. If the Congress have taken a nose-cone dive, and so have the left parties across the country, it's because the traditional allies were deserting them. One has to be intelligent as a voter, and I think one has to be discriminating.
You can't see yourself voting for the BJP.
It has a view of Hindutva, which I don't find easy. I've got on very well with many of the BJP leaders. I've had very good conversation on economic planning with Vashwant Sinha, really enlightening one, and very cordial with Jaswant Singh, even with Advani. I have had, I've not had a chance of meeting Mr. Modi. I can't say I'm pining for it, but I think there are people there in the BJP with whom it's very easy to chat. On the other hand, am I likely to be voting for a party which does not respect secularism in the way I believe we want it? The fact that the Constitution wants it, and that was eliminated somehow in the flag on the 26th of January, worries me. But much more importantly, it is a big commitment of India to secularism. And I think our victory, to some extent,
shows that.
Showed that.
Are you worried about the state of minorities in India at the moment?
I am, of course I am. Because you see, for a long time we got no statement from the Prime Minister. Now we have got statement, and we have to see whether the statements are lived up to.
You say that you're not going to, the government is stalling your chancellorship of Nalanda University. You believe that. Do you believe that the government is going out of its way to actually prevent you from becoming Chancellor of Nalanda University?
First of all, I don't know the answer to that. And second, it doesn't really matter. The intentionality of the government is of minor concern to me. The actual actions of the government is certainly the case. It's certainly very important to me. There was an attempt to redo the board, governing board. Suddenly on the morning of the board meeting, we were told this may be the last meeting, a new board being appointed. It turned out that they actually didn't appoint the board in line with the Indian laws. The Parliamentary Nalanda Act was violated by some of the moves. So that came to nothing. But on the other hand, the fact that they wanted to reappoint the board, the fact that they were certainly not being particularly friendly to me, and many things we wanted to do.
They wanted you out?
Well, I don't know. But what I do know is that we made huge progress. There is a school of history, the school of ecology, environment. Number of students are low. On the other hand, they are very good students. The faculty is very inspired. We have plans of, we had plans of a school of economics, in which I was taking a great interest, a school of public health, which is I'm also taking great interest. I do actually taught a course in the medical school in Harvard last year. And the third was Buddhism and Buddhist studies, on which again I had ancestrally long interest. So we were trying to proceed and also expand the number of students, adjust the fees accordingly. So we were doing all these things. Now the difficulty was that the way the Indian organization following the colonial rule are made, that there is an intention, which is academic freedom, but there are formalities that somebody, the governor has to sign it, the visitor has to sign it, and so on. Now, you could convert these special provisions into political weapons, and by not bringing it to the visitor, as happened to our statutes, some of the statutes never came to the visitor for signature. Similarly, my chancellorship, it came but with recommendation. I believe, I just don't know, I've been told that came with a recommendation that he should not agree to the unanimous recommendation of the governing body, that I should be a secretary.
You said that you're deeply pained by this.
Pardon?
You've said that you're deeply pained by this.
I don't think my pain is really, you know, I'm not a utilitarian, and pain is not the main thing I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with academic success of India.
Right. Just on the point of academic freedom, do you believe those are under assault in India?
I think to a great extent it is.
Academic freedom is under assault.
Well, because
in India.
it depends on how universities are run. I haven't studied in particular. My relationship wasn't with the human development, human resource development thing. So I not even met the minister. I have met the foreign affairs minister. So, but on the other hand, looking just in the newspapers about what's happening to the universities, as well as council like Council of Historical Research, Indian Council of Cultural Relations, I could see that there is a considerable governmental intervention in these decisions. And that, from an academic point of view, ultimately is threatening to academic freedom. Whether it has gone past the point of no return, I just don't know. I hope not.
Right. So the autonomy of certain institutions is being threatened.
Well, it's been threatened in Nalanda. You see, I think this is the thing to understand, that formally an autonomous institution have heads, quote unquote, in this case in Nalanda, visitor, who are supposed to guarantee the academic freedom of the institution, rather than act according to the government. However, if the government says you cannot, then it puts in a president in the case of Nalanda, or a governor in somewhere else, in a very difficult position. So it's a question of whether the government understands that winning an election for the Lok Sabha does not mean it's a permission to undermine the autonomy of academic institutions, not a license to undermine the upper house. They can't, because they can stand up. It's not a way of undermining the court, and they can also stand up. So I think that, but the autonomy of the universities is difficult, because the universities don't have the power of the court and the power of the upper house that these institutions have. So
right.
The universities are easy prey. You could you can go through it like a sword through butter, because there is no institution. They're all based in the British and the European system, in the government understanding the limit of its formal power, as opposed to their actual power as to what they are expected to do. They are expected to listen to the voice of the professoriate, voice of what people in the universities want. That's the issue.
Let's take a short break at this point and come back with lots more on politics in India today and the democratic life in India today with Professor Amartya Sen after this tiny break. Welcome back to Capital View. We're talking to Amartya Sen about the Aam Aadmi Party, about democracy in India, about academic freedom, which he believes is, to some extent, another threat in today's India. Let's talk about the Congress Party, which we spoke about in the previous segment. You alluded to it, but let's go a little deeper into it. The collapse in the Congress Party. What does this mean for Indian politics, and can the Congress revive? What do you think?
I think it can revive. But you have to bear in mind that Congress has been with us for such a long time, and the understanding of how India became independent is so integrally related to Congress and to Gandhiji and Nehru and Patel and others, that it's not easy to get Congress out of the system. Are they making mistakes in terms of political moves? I believe they are. I think there are three levels you can look at them. There is a question of vision, there's a question of strategy, and a question of tactics. I think the tactical blunders have been quite large. I think Hyderabad would be a very good way of understanding what happened. I think it happened also in all kinds of other ways even in the context of Delhi and so on. And I think also in West Bengal. But then there is the issue of strategy. I think that's where the really important issues are as to what the thinking is. I don't get the impression of a great clarity of thought. It's quite clear there's a leader. Rahul Gandhi I happen to know. He's a student at Trinity College and very likable guy. Whether he's a great political leader, that's something which is, has to be judged by results.
You don't think he's a
well,
great
no,
political leader?
I didn't say that. I said I just don't know. That has to be judged by the results. I'm sometimes told, I've seen in the paper, that I advise Sonia Gandhi. I'm always flattered to hear it. I met her 4 times. The first was in the backs of Trinity on the Avenue when Rajiv Gandhi introduced me to his brilliant girlfriend.
Right.
And I didn't start talking about Indian politics with her immediately in 1960. She was very kind. After the Nobel, she invited me to have tea with her. She came to the Bharat Ratna event in Rashtrapati Bhavan, and she organized a discussion on Gandhi Day in October some years ago in the UN, and she hosted lunch. So I met her, and I like her.
Right.
And of course, I think, looking at the election, she was very, very effective in the 2004 election, and dramatically effective. So she had shown her mettle. Whether she is still in a position to carry that weight, I just don't know. She's not very well. I don't know the condition of that. I hear a lot of skepticism of Rahul. I'm not able to judge to what extent that skepticism is justified. And it would be ultimately not for me, or for that matter, not for you to judge. It would be for the Congress people to judge whether they can do it. I think the vision of Congress also requires some restatement.
The vision requires a restatement.
Yeah, that secularism is not to be sacrificed for tactical grounds, as it sometimes been. Then Congress was a to-do party. It did a lot of things. Even the last government did a certain thing. Polio got eliminated, HIV epidemic got tamed, we learned how to deal with tsunami without people getting killed, and India achieved the highest rate of growth it had ever achieved under UPA. But in some ways, they were even unable to claim credit for what they have done, not to mention to do those things which they would have done.
They were not able to communicate.
And the big thing, of course, that the basic educational neglect, which actually goes back to Congress a long time, that was even first 5-year plan, second 5-year plan, that needs total correction, which they haven't done. And the basic healthcare neglect. Indian thinking has been very fuzzy, unfortunately, on basic healthcare and basic education, and that requires change, and Congress can provide a really new ground in that direction. Right. So can the left, but they haven't. I mean, neither Congress nor they have stuck to relatively peripheral issues. So am I very happy with the way Congress and left being run? I think I have to say no. On the other hand,
you keep emphasizing secularism and pluralism. Do you believe that that is very central to the Indian story? Because Amitav Ghosh I interviewed recently, and he said if India loses its pluralism, it loses everything. And Barack Obama was recently in India, and he says if religious freedom splinters India, then India is finished. So do you believe that religious freedom and religious plurality is at the very center?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Amitav Ghosh, as I normally do, but on this very much, yes, indeed. I think the multi-religiosity of India and the secular thing, and there's a difference. Pluralism is tolerance of different religions, but it does not have the, what I would associate with Akbar, the principle of state being equidistant from the different religions. Vivekananda's great speech in Chicago is a pluralist speech. All the religions are true. As a secularist, I don't have to accept all the religions are true. I may even take the view none of them are true. That makes me in some ways a different kind of pluralism.
Right.
From the Vivekananda pluralism. Right. On the other hand, secularism completely allows me to hold either of those views, and pluralism does too, but they're different kind of pluralism. But the idea that the minorities be at a disadvantage in terms of security of their lives, in terms of economic, social opportunities and political opportunities they have. I think that's very, very central to secularism. And I would say that Congress has some rebuilding to do on that subject.
But the fact that Modi has just recently spoken about religious freedom, do you think that's important, the fact that he's spoken?
You know, Modi's speeches are pretty good often. I like the fact that on top of the Red Fort, he said various things with which I had been previously associated, namely the danger that women face, the need for toilets, and the extent of hunger in India. And so I was delighted to see them. I wasn't claiming credit for them. I would like him to take even more of what I say.
Right.
But the difference between what was said there and what has been done is quite big, actually. So I think while I like speech, speech is part of action. On the other hand, I also would like some non-speech action in order to carry through what the speech rightly emphasizes. So I welcome that speech, and I only hope that the non-speech action will follow, the corruption will stop, the threatening will stop, and the more violent Hindutva element would not
Will the
not have
BJP move to the political center? Do you see it moving at all to the political center?
I don't know.
You don't know that?
I just don't know.
Just coming back to a theme of yours, which I know is very important to you, and we've spoken about it many times, the sort of growth versus equity question that bedevils India. Do you believe that that debate is still very vital? Because unless India gets its equity right, it really can't have the growth.
Yeah, but that doesn't make it growth versus equity. That's the wrong way of placing it. You see, I think there are certain equity issues which may be anti-growth. But the basic equity lack that's staring us in the face is absence of decent schools for primary schools for kids and absence of basic health care for all. Now, there's nothing as big in the long run for sustaining economic high growth as having an educated population and health care that's shared by all. An unhealthy, uneducated population is India, the only country that tried to become a big player in economic growth with an unhealthy and uneducated population. It's not true of China, it's not true of Japan, going back a long time, of Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, and Brazil, Mexico, and going back further, Europe and America. They have all done basic education, basic health care as a vital part of the society, which has also helped them to grow economically. So at this time, the issues that are central are not equity versus growth issues. These are equity plus growth issues, because it's these issues that you have to emphasize. It's not that you first have growth, and then once you're very rich, then you do education, then you do healthcare. I don't think that's the right way of thinking about it at all. So it's a question of those things that are pro-equity, like education, healthcare, basic level, is also very central to economic growth. Witnessed experience of East Asia, of Latin America, and earlier on Europe and America.
Professor Sen, as always, a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for joining me on Capital View.
Thank you very much.